Today we want to talk about how to come home from combat in a way that is much more successful than the average soldier is experiencing today. As one of my soldiers said in group therapy this week, and he said it many times before, war is easy, but coming home is hell. Coming home is hell because of many different reasons. And we're going to talk about some of those reasons today, but the most important message today is a list of things that you can begin to consider and practice and train for that will help you really, truly, fully come home. We talk about home, and many people have different meanings of home. I think of home as the place where the heart is. I think of home as the place where sometimes called man's castle. It's where the average person feels safe and protected and accepted and loved. And it's a spiritual place. And I'm going to come back to that concept in just a few minutes. Earlier in my career, I worked as a director of a children's home in Atlanta. These children came from broken but mendable families. And one of the most important things for them was going home. They lived with us in very nice cottages and had very nice food, but they didn't have their loving parents. In many cases, the parents were divorced or had died, and we worked with them and their families until they could get back together. And one of the most common things would be a child would come up to me and say, "Mr. Brown, I'm going home for good." And that was one of the happiest moments in their life. I also have an early memory, perhaps going back when I was 3, 4, or 5 years of age. I developed a contagious infectious disease. And I can remember very distinctly how I felt when I was told by the public health doctor that I'd be going away from home into a hospital where I would be treated and where no one else would catch my infection. I was so upset by that. I remember crying and begging my mother and not to let them take me away from home. And my mother was a very strong person, and she prevailed. And the doctor said, "Okay, we have to put signs, yellow signs on your house saying quarantine, and every member of your family must stay in the house. They cannot come out." So my brother, my sisters, my mother, my father, everyone stayed in the house, I think for maybe 21 days or more. But I had that feeling that I was protected and loved and cared for. Thankfully, I got well, and the family was able to go about its normal business again, but it made the definite sacrifice for me. There's an interesting song, and I won't try to sing it, but it shows that there are people who should care that sometimes don't care. And it goes something like this. Rocking alone in an old rocking chair, I saw an old woman with silvery gray hair. She seemed so neglected by those who should care, rocking alone in an old rocking chair. I know some children in an orphan home who would think they were in heaven if she were their own. They would never allow her to sit there and stare, rocking alone in an old rocking chair. One last song, again, I'll try to remember it with words and not with music, but also sends this message. And perhaps you would have the same feeling that I have about this particular song. It's an old one. It goes like this. Two eyes that shine so bright, two arms that hold so tight, two lips that kiss goodnight, that little boy of mine. No one knows what his coming has meant. He's like an angel that heaven has sent. He's all the world to me. To me, he'll always be that little boy of mine. So one last thing from my childhood. My mother used to say, "Bobby, don't ever forget who you are." I assumed I knew what the meaning of that was when I left home. The first time I really left home was to go away to college. But now that I look back on it, I'm not exactly sure what she meant. But I think it had to do with the fact that I come from humble origins and that I'm from a family that loved me and a family that had high values, and that I should try to practice those values and remain humble. Now, I think the first question, besides answering the question, what is home like for you, is who are you? Who are you as a soldier coming back from combat, perhaps coming back many times from combat? And I want to tell you how I see you and how I think everyone who really knows you sees you. First of all, you are someone who cares about others. Caring for others really defines who you are. You defend our nation. You make sacrifices, and you make them willingly. And often that sacrifice involves being away from home for a long period of time. As a soldier, you follow orders, even though those orders sometimes put you in harm's way. You have unique skills. Only 1% of our nation are real soldiers, and only that 1% knows all the things that you know. You connect our nation's history with our future. You cope with changes. And that's an interesting thing because you cope better in warfare with changes than you do when you come home. You respect our nation, you respect our family, and you have every reason in the world to respect yourself. The remainder of this educational material is to try to help you learn some lessons about how to come home more smoothly and how to increase your self-respect. Many people do not understand what you've gone through because your wounds are mostly invisible. They're real wounds and they're very painful. But the people you deal with in the public, perhaps even in your own home, don't understand what you've been suffering from. And what I hear almost every day in my practice as a psychiatrist at Fort Lee is that soldiers will say, quote, "I have no tolerance for ignorance." And they see ignorance everywhere. You find it in store clerks. You find it in the 7-Eleven coffee counter clerks. You find it in the commissary cashiers. You find it in administrative civilians on military posts. You find this intolerance of your situation in drivers who are competing for parking spaces or competing for the left lane on an interstate highway. You can find it in most every day in everyone, even in your own family. Sometimes they forget what you've endured. And what's worst of all, your families have little knowledge of what you've gone through. Now, these are some of the things I think that you could practice. If you even write them down and carry them in a card in your pocket, you can pull them out several times a day and remind yourself. I believe you will find that being home will go much more smoothly if you try to practice these 7 points. Patience. There's no need to be in a hurry. Be patient. 2, acceptance. Don't try to change every single point in every person's life. 3, flexibility. There's no reason to be rigid in your rules anymore when you're home. 4 is accommodation. Make room for people's idiosyncrasies that you don't understand. Tranquility. Try to be peaceful and calm at home. Affection. Try to show affection, and perhaps more than anything else, try to show kindness. If you treat others with kindness and dignity and respect, 90% of the time you will have very little problems. I recently had an encounter with my landlord where I rent a house near Fort Lee. There was a problem that needed repairing, and he wanted it repaired in the least expensive way, and I wanted it repaired in the way I thought was right. And there was exchange of emails. And I got a very strong email from one of his representatives saying, in effect, if I didn't like the repair work, even though I've lived there 3 years, I could give notice and move out. Frankly, that shocked me and annoyed me. And as I sat at my typewriter, I started to think about an angry response. And then I slowed down, and I thanked that person for responding to my email. I tried to take the high road. I said, I'm going to go with your recommendations, but I want you to be aware that I think there's a possibility that my health might be involved if this is not repaired properly. And then he wrote back, he calmed down. He said he didn't want me to think he didn't care about my health, but I think treating him with kindness and dignity and respect, even though he was extremely angry with me, resolved the situation to my advantage. Now, how can you really be at home? I made a list of things, and I'm going to make sure you get a copy of this list as you can read it yourself. This is how to really be at home. First of all, you have to want to be at home. So often I hear soldiers say, I'd rather be back in combat than to be home. You can't imagine how disappointing that sounds to your family. In effect, you're saying, I would rather be over there fighting the enemy with all kinds of weapons who are trying to kill me than to be here with you, my wife, and my children. Make coming home a mission. Just as you went to combat and you're on a mission, you had training before that, training during that, and it's very important to train yourself to be home. Plan and write it out how you can be more comfortable at home. Make it your highest priority. Train, as I said, and practice. Make your family more important than yourself. Painful self-awareness is one of the major problems of these invisible wounds. And one of the quickest ways to reduce that is by helping others. Plan to be fully present, not just in body, not with the television blasting away, or music, or other distractions. Even if it's no more than 5 minutes at first, fully be present to your family. So you know what's going on, you can answer their questions, you can show interest in what's been going on in their day, and that sort of thing. Apologize when you lose your temper. Ask for forgiveness when you lose your temper. And learn to play. I think that's one of the things that most soldiers have forgotten because of the seriousness of combat. You can make anything playful by changing your attitude. Even your work can be somewhat playful. And one of the most important characteristics of the self-actualized person is the ability to play. And finally, discover spiritual resources. I recently learned that ethnologists who studied languages, every language in the world has a word for sacred. What is sacred in your life? What can you make sacred? What can you learn from gathering in a church or a synagogue or going to a place where you feel that you can experience the sacred? So in a quick summary, coming home is maybe more important than going to war. Coming home is going to require practice and training and willingness on your part to fully be present, to be a good, decent human being. And I think that you will find in treating your family with kindness, dignity, and respect, coming home is going to be a happy time for you. Best of luck to every one of you.